Isn't it interesting? We've got different countries, all the same issues, exactly the same issues, but slightly different ways of responding to each of them. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk to you about a qualification that we've built, which is actually at degree level, level 7, so it takes people to a bachelor's level degree, which is due to start mid-year this year. And but before I talk about that degree process, which is aimed at trying to create some consistency and common language and common philosophy at the lower level qualifications right through to degree. That was sort of the aim of it. I just want to talk to you a little bit about some of the dynamics of our workforce. They'll be quite similar to you. In the social services workforce, which is roughly speaking the aged care, disability, counselling, social work, community development sectors, we have a very high turnover of staff. As you can see from the slide, it's about 25 to 35% on average. In the aged care sector, it's actually quite high. It peaks out at about 40%. But across, in average, it's 25 to 35%. And there's a real problem with that because the way their qualifications are designed at the moment is as people change jobs in the churn, they become unqualified as they go through the process. And we've got to put a stop to that because that's not actually helping anybody. So that's some of the dynamics we've got to deal with. We've got skills shortages everywhere. And so on our occupational shortage lists, we're just calling out, at our Department of Labour, we're just calling out for people to come and work in the social services. And interestingly, most of them are coming from the Philippines at the moment. At the lower level, at the sort of the lower level qualification area, and at the higher level they're coming from the UK, but we're certainly not producing enough domestically. Our workforce is about a third qualified, which is pretty shocking. All of those sectors I just talked to you about are all unregulated. Social work is closest to getting regulation, but it's still a voluntary registration process at this stage. And so, so we've got a long way to catch up in terms of thinking about just baseline qualifications. Now, I've just got a little bit of information at the bottom of the slide there. In the UK, they've determined that they're going to need to double the size of their workforce in the next 10 years. And I can hear that there's a huge growth in the workforce here, which might be even bigger, actually, from the looks of things. But in New Zealand, we can't do this because we simply don't have the workforce and we don't have the money. And particularly in the context of the recession, we've had to start to say to ourselves, we've got to rethink the way we do things. Because if we carry on going with the kind of direction that we are, we'll go bust really swiftly. We won't be able to pay the wages, we won't be able to service the clients. So one of the major dynamics for us in thinking about a qualification going forward was we actually have to change our practice methodologies of service delivery. Our sector, we've kind of, in our analysis, divided it into 3 areas, which won't be surprising to any of you. We've got the specialised social services, which is at the top of the pyramid. In New Zealand, that's about a population of about 20,000, and it comprises of degree-level social workers, counsellors, service managers. What attracts all the government attention and thinking and funding? Child protection services are in there. And that's where most of the dollar goes. The tax dollar for social service, it goes there and it sits there. But underneath that, of course, we've got the support workers. And in our analysis and research, we actually think that this is a far, far more important body of people than the body above it. And that's not to say we don't need specialised social services. We absolutely do. But we're not giving recognition and creating pathways for the support workers. Now, support workers, generally speaking, whether it's in mental health or post-operative care or wherever, their job descriptions tend to be centred around cleaning, hygiene, shopping, those sorts of things. But when we've done some research and looked at what support workers do, that's the least important part of their role. More often than not, they're helping Mrs. Brown by taking her to the supermarket so that she knows that she can get there next time herself. They're saying to the neighbour, hey, look, I'm not going to be at Mrs. Brown's next week because I've got something else on. Would you mind giving me a ring if you've got any concerns? Would you mind popping in and seeing her? Or they're saying to Mrs. Brown, hey, what's the names of your children? Because I want to give them a ring just to make sure that they know that you're a bit fragile at the moment. And so what they're actually doing with Mrs. Brown is they're actually doing the reverse of what the specialised social services are doing. They're building social cohesion around her. And they're building sustainable models for her. But none of that you'll find in their job description, and none of that you'll find in their training. You'll just find that that's because they're human. But we just miss that element so far in the development of our qualifications. Very important part of our workforce. Finally, we have the informal carer, and I don't know how many thousands of people, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people fall into this category, but these are the people that spend more than 20 hours looking after someone in their community. It could be someone in their own family, but often it's other people in the community. Often it's looking after children that don't belong to them but just live in the street. Now, without these informal carers, our communities would cease to function. The informal carers are the cornerstones of what keeps our communities going, because if they stopped playing their role, lots and lots of things that make communities work just wouldn't work. So they're an incredibly important part. But as yet, they're not part of a qualification framework. They don't get any support. It's interesting, there's a survey to say that an informal carer is 20 times more likely to need antidepressants than someone who is not an informal carer, because they too suffer from social isolation. But no one is helping them get training and working ways to have self-care, such as, for example, something that doesn't cost any money, to form a neighbourhood group of carers that can get together for a coffee once a week. No one's facilitating that process, and it's not coming out of any of the educational kind of products that we've in the past developed. Okay, so now I've got only a few minutes, so I'll talk about our national degrees. We wanted to make it a degree because we wanted to create a qualification that united people working at the lower levels and staircase them working through to the higher levels. Why? So that we could create some common philosophy and some common language, and that people would be able to understand the occupational roles as they move through them in the workplace. But when we started to venture into workplace degrees, we came across an awful lot of difficulty and challenge from particularly the university vice-chancellors, who in New Zealand are a very, very powerful lobby group. So what we needed to do was we needed to think again about standards, because actually some of the points that they put across as a group of vice-chancellors were valid. What we've done as industry training organisations in New Zealand is break down knowledge into tiny minutiae little pieces, tiny little blocks of knowledge, which actually are meaningless. So if it was about a caring role, we would have a little block of knowledge, a competency, a standard around doing an interview. And that was separate from another little block of knowledge over here, which was around creating rapport. But you can't do that. You've got to bring these things together. So we went through the challenges, we went on a learning journey. And so what we did is, using lots of evidence, we came up with this model here, which we call the 5 domains of competency. And we made sure that these 5 domains underpinned every single one of our standards. We also made the standards much bigger. So out of a degree, we've only got 23 standards. So the standards are much more thoroughly, they're much more integrated. So in this 5 domains of competence, you have the technical and the functional skills, the legal and ethical values that people need to know about, organisational skills. People need to know how to influence organisationally. They need to be organised too. Interpersonal and self-awareness, and lastly, cognitive skills. Kind of resonates a little bit with some of the stuff the last speaker was talking about, I think, in terms of building leadership. And it's the integration of those 5 competencies that we think are important. And what's really interesting, as we've gone through the research on this, what we've found is that a very beginning practitioner has this tiny little kind of centre of this flower, if it's gone well. But as they grow and they become masters of their discipline, that circle grows outwards, and they're able to more fully understand each of those 5 domains. But it's kind of interesting too, because people who come straight out of universities, they've got really good cognitive and really good technical skills, and sometimes legal and ethical skills, but they're really lacking on the interpersonal and organisational skills. People who do learning in the workplace are really good at interpersonal and organisational, but lack on some of the other competency domains. So what we've done with our 23 standards underpinning our degree is to use this framework so that academics can see that we're trying to do something differently and for the right reasons. And they can, when you look at the standards, which you're most welcome to look at our website, I haven't got time to show you them today, you'll see that they're all there. Okay, this is my last slide, or second to last slide. Now, it hasn't all been easy, and it took us right through to about November last year to convince the regulatory authorities of degrees that it was okay and appropriate to have a workplace learning degree, a degree centred in the workplace. And our New Zealand Qualifications Authority in November finally signed off on it. and said, yep, okay, this is a new process for New Zealand, and we'll let it go ahead. And since that time, we've had a change of minister, and we've just been informed at the end of February that he's considering a last bid from the Vice Chancellor's Committee, and he's thinking about putting the argument out for the public discussion, which I think is fair enough in some ways. And so the argument is academic freedom and not having industry involvement versus creating consistency and pathways for our social care environment. So it could be delayed. I'm hoping it won't be. The only way they can delay it is actually to have a change of legislation, because it's all been approved now. But we will see. So thanks for listening. It's great to be here.